look how much pretending we do, especially in the name of leadership, but it's not limited to that. Like pretending at work, pretending at home, it's exhausting. And then it's like, well, okay, there must be something we hate worse than the exhaustion from pretending. And I think it's that we fear uncertainty.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. The next time you have a US dollar bill in your hands, turn it over and look at the backside. On the left, you'll see a seal featuring a pyramid, and on the right, you'll see another seal of an eagle with a constellation of stars above its head. My guest this week here on the show is Matthew Barzun. And after reading Matthew's new book, The Power of Giving Away Power, I'll never look at a dollar bill the same way again. You see, Matthew is the former U.S. ambassador to Sweden and the United Kingdom, and in his book, he lays out the story of the creation of the seal of the United States, even down to its placement on the backside of the dollar bill. It is an anecdote from U.S. history that offers a striking perspective of how we view power and leadership these days. You see, the pyramid structure of leadership creates a hierarchy, where power and control are consolidated at the top, and only those with power and control make the decisions, create the ideas, and determine the course of action. A constellation, on the other hand, relies on individual parts coming together to form something greater and grander than previously thought possible. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. As Matthew writes in his book, the pyramid mindset offers freedom from. The constellation mindset offers freedom with. It's the difference between independence and interdependence. It's the difference between win-win outcomes, which Matthew says is ultimately still a losing formula, and co-creating new outcomes. It's not just freedom, and it's not just togetherness. It's freedom together. I'll never be able to look at another one of these the same way again. How did you come to understand the story behind the back of the US dollar bill and the pyramid and the constellation? Like, what sparked your interest there?
Well, I knew, this book is trying to contrast two different mindsets.
Yeah.
One, the pyramid mindset, and one we'll talk about later, the constellation mindset. And the pyramid mindset, I knew that was the right symbol to symbolize because it's out there. I mean, there's pyramid schemes. There's, it's just out. People know what it is. If you try to go do an org chart in Microsoft Office, it'll be like org chart, and then it'll pick for you hierarchy, and then it'll just build. Like, it's hard not to build a pyramid, right? Or when fundraisers get together for small things or big things, they draw fundraising pyramids. So that shape I always knew symbolized one way of thinking about the world: in, out, up, down, sorting, sifting, ranking, rating, that world. I didn't have a good image for what the opposite of it was. And so as I was writing the book early on in this journey, I was just, and I called it the fuzzball. I was like the pyramid of the fuzzball, which was just a placeholder for like some other image. Then I'm sitting there looking at the dollar bill, and I look, and I've seen it a million times. Or if you or your listeners have a U.S. passport, mm-hmm. The front of the U.S. seal is even more, that's all is on the front of the passport. So it's bigger there. And so there's the eagle, right? And there's the shield, and then the eagle famously, one set of talons is clutching arrows symbolizing war, the others clutching olive branches symbolizing peace. Our famous national motto, E pluribus unum, is on there. But back when they designed this thing, this is back, they started it in 1776. It took longer to design this US logo called the Great Seal than it did to win the war. And we don't have time to get into that whole story, but I see this on the back of the dollar bill. And there was a formula for how you did seals back then. And so you needed the eagle and the shield and all that kind of stuff. They all had a role to play. But the essence of this logo is something called a crest, right? As in like the family crest, sort of English stuff. But so this is supposed to be the essence of the overall thing. And the people who came up with it picked this 13 asymmetrical stars, beams of light radiating out behind it. And it was supposed to symbolize that national motto. That's how we were supposed to think about how you could be from many, but also one. How do you get unity without uniformity? How do you get diversity without division, right? All these sort of things we've always struggled with. But I think this was like the great American idea. We fall short of it, but this idea of be totally yourself, a star, and yet connected to and part of something much more useful and much more powerful than you ever could alone, namely a constellation. So long-winded answer to, and those two symbols for those two different mindsets, another way of saying the constellation is, although this word is kind of loaded and sometimes misunderstood, but it's interdependence, right? And the world of the pyramid is the world of dependence.
Why that, what you just said there, why is interdependence such a loaded word?
I don't know. And maybe I'm curious if you would agree. I've just, in my experience, saying it out loud back when we could get together face to face with people, it's a very positive word for some people. It always has been for me. But I think some temperaments are like, ooh, it's kind of group hug, kumbaya. It's got kind of a collectivist vibe, which is not how I intend it. But it can connote those things to others. So I try, my way to try to get at it a different way is to do the following. You say, okay, two cars in a parking lot. Let's say Denver, you're in Denver, two cars in a Denver parking lot. They have, this is not in the book, but this is how I try to get at it. The name of the game, and you're going to get this right because it's not a very hard question. You have to guess which is the Democrat car and which is the Republicans car, right? Mm-hmm. So car number one, they're identical cars. They have only one bumper sticker, and that bumper sticker only has one word on it. Car number one says freedom. Car number two says together, right? Mm-hmm. And you would guess, I'm not going to put you on the spot, or I could, but you would guess the Republican is the freedom car, and you'd be right. You know? Right. Democrat is the together card. And in my adult lifetime, I just turned 50, right? My adult lifetime has been a fight between the freedom crowd and the together crowd, right? And both have been taken, especially in the light of COVID, to their kind of logical and kind of radical extremes. So the freedom taken to its extreme is like freedom from, just leave me the heck alone, right? Pure independence. And then the together crowd taken to its extreme is total togetherness. It's like, just tell me what to do. And it's almost like the herd immunity is almost like said in there'll be by people who don't love that, like, wow, are we a bunch of cattle in a herd? Like, come on, we're individual people choosing to be together. And so if you go back to those bumper stickers, what I think we really want, and certainly in the context of COVID, but much broader than that, what we need and want is freedom together. Freedom together. And if you go back to the very beginning of this country, the formation of it, it was the best idea. Any band of revolutionaries can declare independence. I mean, it takes bravery, but not much more than that. The hard part, and again, we fall short, but the best idea we've had is this idea of interdependence, symbolized by the constellation, how you can be yourself, a pure individual, a star, but choose to look at everyone around you like a star and make connections between them. That's true at the individual level. It's true how states would work together, how countries could work together. that is the pattern and the symbol of interdependence as an active verb.
That you use the phrase in the book, freedom with, to describe the constellation mindset, as you just talked about there. And this pyramid mindset of power and structure is freedom from. In the context of, let's say business life, what is that freedom from, and how does that, I guess, soil the interdependencies that we have in a business?
I think, and I go, but one of the top, I think it is the top selling business book of all time, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've read that. It's a wonderful book. So it's sold a gajillion copies, I think, for a reason. Written by a guy named Stephen Covey, who's no longer alive. But I started reading it, and I read, and without getting into all the habits, it's basically 2 points. Like the first set of habits are how you move from dependence to independence. And then the second set of habits is how you move from independence to interdependence. So I was reading this. It's like, oh, wow. Okay, here's a guy talking about interdependence in interesting new ways. And he wrote this back in 1989, right? So it's been issued a zillion times.
Yeah.
And it still resonates. And he said at like the 15th or 20th anniversary of the book, he said, if I could do it again, I would have said that interdependence is 10 times more important and 10 times harder than moving from dependence to independence. And in fact, he wrote a whole nother book that wasn't as popular called The Eighth Habit. And basically the whole point of that book is that interdependence is more important than independence. But it's hard, and it takes this leap of faith that you can achieve freedom with someone else. And so I think the easier thing to do, because the world of dependence is so stifling, that the right first step is to escape that world of dependence. But if you stay there, I think you come to realize, and I think the last 25 years has certainly been, if you just take the world of sort of technology, we've been given the opportunity, aided and abetted by all these wonderful, I think, potentially wonderful technologies, to just increase our freedom from, right? And it's led to a lot of loneliness and isolation, because independence really is just a form of dependence. It's just dependence on yourself alone. Mm-hmm. And some of these other leaders I talk about in the book have realized that you can actually be your most individual self with and through other people, not all by yourself, not totally freedom from.
I go back to that example of the 2 cars in the parking lot that you just described, and talking about how really we want the combination of the two, the freedom together. How do we message on the freedom side that we want together, and on the together side that we want freedom? So much of this show is about finding common ground, and that middle ground, that often in that nuanced middle, we find that we're actually saying a lot of the same things. How does language play a role in that?
It's, and I think I don't know. Here's my hunch from it. It can't be messaged as some mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road compromise. But it's sort of like half freedom, half together, right? And compromise, we're told compromise is a good thing. We talk about this in the book. It's like, and this wonderful leader, Mary Parker Follett, I hope we can talk about later, reminds us that like compromise actually isn't what we're going for. And so this isn't a compromise between freedom and together. This is fully free, fully together, right? I mean, it's like, it is both of them. And so you would say to the freedom crowd, the true way to be free is free together, right? I mean, the Declaration of Independence was 13 separate colonies declared independence. Now, how are we going to figure out how to work together, right? We're not going to get rid of all our disagreements. We're going to have structure and rigor around how we resolve them. Sports, I think, is an interesting place to explore, and I know you shared with me that you used to cover sports as a journalist.
Yeah.
I mean, sports gets at a lot of this. I mean, I think a lot of the healing that we need as a country is probably more likely happen on ESPN than CNN. Because something's happening in sports. It gets people out of politics for a moment, right? Tribal affiliations are okay and part of it. I'm a big Red Sox fan. Like, we hate Yankees fans,
Sure.
they hate us, right? But there's actually a great story that it's not in the book, but there's a men's bathroom on I-95 somewhere between Boston and New York, and someone had scribbled on the mirror, right next to the mirror, "Yankees suck," right? And someone else came and scratched it out and wrote, "Red Sox suck," and then someone scratched that out, right? So this diatribe goes for like 2 feet of the wall, all along the mirror. Then some guy comes in with a green Sharpie magic marker, circles the whole thing, and says, "And we all love baseball." Now, this gets to, I think, your question, which is, when you hear that, there's like, for a split second, you just did it. It's like, oh, it's like, oh, that's nice. But then you stop and think about it for a second. You're like, that's not very satisfying. And I have not been back. But you know that people went on to say where Mr. Green Sharpie could put his pen. Like, Mr. Green Sharpie didn't settle anything. And there's something kind of condescending in the Green Sharpie, "We all love baseball." It kind of reveals that Mr. Green Sharpie probably isn't a baseball fan in a way, because it's sort of like discounting the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry. And that's not how we're going to get anywhere. Like, you don't discount it. So what I wish could be written on that wall, and this is sort of baseball geeky, so all listeners may not know this, and I'm actually not much of a baseball expert, but the interesting thing to write in a different color Sharpie is, should the American League eliminate the designated hitter rule? ? Okay, so then all of a sudden, that's something that Yankees fans and Red Sox fans both care about, right? Might actually have similar or divergent. It's just a new way of mixing up, and it's an important question. And what you would have happen, so imagine there was actually a discussion, not on a men's room wall, but in some other format, like a meeting, where you worked that through, and you came up, you made a determination together whether you think that would be good for the American League or not. And what would be happening in those moments is, and by the way, I think the NFL, I'm a big football fan, shockingly a Patriots fan. They could do this too, right? You could ask fans, you could ask participants in fantasy football leagues to be involved in the rulemaking and the rule amending process every year. After the Super Bowl, before the preseason, there's this downtime of 5 months where nothing really happens. Activate those people, ask them questions. They're really fervent fans of the game. They don't get to decide, but they could participate in a process. And what would be happening over time, and then you'd see if those rules were adopted, you'd see if they made any difference to, let's say, quarterback safety or something, and then you do it all over again. Then you'd have another season, and you could see if these rules had their desired effect or not, and do it all over again. And I know you said you grew up in a family of government. It's like, if we have to start thinking about democracy not just on voting day. You know what I mean? And that's a piece of it for sure.
Right.
But like, if we could start to work on and disagree on constructively rules of the game that we love, like you could in sports, that I think would be interesting. And you'd start to develop the habits of interdependence. And you would actually learn, and this is a loaded word that bores so many people. It's an important word, but boring, and sort of is civics. It's like, just reminds people of, I don't know, bad middle school something.
Yep, exactly.
And it just sort of turns it just like, it's not a good word, even though it's a really important set of things. But if you do it in a sports context, people don't have that baggage, and they love the game, and they know that the rules needed to be mended and amended over time to keep the game they love. And that's true of our government too. We just don't think of it that way.
I love that you brought up Mary Parker Follett and the fact that she marked compromise as a bad outcome of a meeting, in addition to, I believe it was acquiescence and victory, right? One side wins, one side loses.
Very good memory.
Yeah. Her only good outcome of a meeting was a new way. I forget exactly what she called it, but
it's funny. It's like co-creation is one way of putting it. The word she used, which is loaded in an unhelpful way, she wrote 100 years ago, right? So she said, I use co-creation because I think it's less loaded. She says integration, which, we've had a whole, in the decades after she wrote, that word is loaded and I think not helpful for what she meant, which was making something together, basically.
Yeah.
And the example, and I don't put this in the book, but I sort of wish I had, the example she used 100 years ago, and she was the most sought after speaker on the sort of TED Talk circuit of her day, with CEOs, nonprofits. She was amazing, and she had sort of the viral TED Talk of her day, all about these issues. And so to bring why compromise is bad, she tells the story of when you decided, and this is kind of hard for us to imagine, but back then people were deciding to get their homes electrified, right? So bring electric light into your house. So that's hard for us to imagine, but let's imagine it. So you've got some cool little house that isn't electrified and you invite the electrician guy over. Now, and this is sort of her thought experiment for why compromise is bad. So you've got an idea as the homeowner of like where you want all the lights. Right. So you tell the electrician, I want one here and here and here. And he listens respectfully, or she listens respectfully, and says, well, that's not going to work. I mean, that is so dangerous. Your house will burn down. So here's the plan that is safe. And then he pitches you on the plan that like is up to code and works. And you're like, I can't live in a house that is lit that way. Like, no, thanks, buddy. So imagine a compromise between those. Your half your house will burn down and half of it will look really ugly and not the way you want it. Right? So if both people leave with like half of what they wanted, that's a compromise, and it is unfulfilling and unsatisfying for both people. And so in that example, and this happens all the time in our lives, and we know it, and we maybe don't even give credit for it. It's like, imagine those two people just working through it. The electrician sharing more like, look, my plan was a plan that was safe. It's not the only plan that was safe. And then the homeowner says, well, okay, I could live with it there. And what if we tried this? I mean, they could come up with some new, neither person entered that meeting with the idea that they emerge out of that meeting with. And they have a plan that is safe and looks fine.
Do you feel like that could have been the outcome of, gosh, I mean, think about everything that went on in the last 18 months, just socially, economically, racially here in the United States, at least, that the immediate, I just feel like, Matthew, the immediate response to so many of the issues that we've dealt with was either victory over the other side. My idea is going to beat out yours, or this weird compromise where nobody really feels like it is freedom together. Do you feel like that's been so much of the issue?
And I'm a Democrat, and I remember, and what I'm about to say isn't a Democrat or a Republican thing, but at the end, so right when COVID was breaking out, there was, I think CNN had one more slot scheduled for a Democratic primary debate, and it was going to be Biden and Bernie, right? They were the two ones still in the race. And I think and then the question was, because COVID was hitting, it's like, well, should they go ahead and continue it as a two-person debate, or should they cancel it? And so here, and I was like, well, okay, there is a third option. So let's, by way of answer to your question, imagine, and I know this, I don't think this is a crazy idea. Obviously, it's unlikely. But imagine they had thought of doing a third thing with the 2 or 3 hours, whatever they had booked. Don't cancel it, but don't hold the debate. Do something else. Mm-hmm. And I'll give it a word later. Biden shows up, Bernie shows up, and they invite back Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Mayor Pete, right? All the people who had been on that stage before, but who had dropped out. And you invite them back, and maybe they all say yes, maybe some say yes, some say no. It doesn't really matter. And then Biden, who was the presumptive nominee, I mean, the math at that point was pretty inevitable that he was eventually going to get it. He actually says, I'm just imagining to Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, it's just like, look, I think you're clearly passionate about healthcare, and you think my position is kind of this mealy mouth, middle of the road. What do you think I am misunderstanding, or do you think I'm being naive, or what is it? I've obviously been in Washington a long time. What do you think I'm missing? Right? And really ask that of a really smart person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just, and then she could say what she thought and felt. And then he could do that on all the topics that were supposed to be debated that night. And that would be a discussion, right? Like, whoa. And I don't know, I think that would be really interesting just to show within one team how there could be structured disagreement that is productive. And maybe, big platforms don't change, but little bit of change and learning happens live on television. And I'm sure there would be posturing and there would be all sorts of fine, but that doesn't seem crazy to me. Yeah. And so we can start practicing that in our own lives, in our own organizations, that kind of Mary Parker Follett, make something together.
If we could co-create a little bit here, Matthew, you took that topic of the Democratic debate there. Fast forward a few months when you had President Trump and the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, on the same stage in that first debate. And I think we can all remember how that one went. It was hours of just yelling and screaming over each other. If we could co-create, if both sides could have come together and co-created a different format, venue to have that kind of a structure, and understanding that debates at the presidential level have been a part of this country's history for so many years. But how could we co-create a situation where it didn't devolve into the schoolyard shouting match that it did?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a good question. I mean, I encourage, YouTube has the full unedited black and white Nixon Kennedy famous first televised debate of the campaign of 1960. That's really worthwhile. Like, you have to be sort of a political geek to watch the whole thing, but it's worth watching. And it gets talked about because, people who listened to it on radio thought Nixon was better and Kennedy looked better on TV. Like, that's what you hear about it if you're just sort of reading articles. So that's why I went and checked it out. But what's actually fascinating is just the level of civility. Mm-hmm. And they actually, it's not that long ago, and they really didn't like each other, and Democrats and Republicans. I mean, it's not like bitter partisanship isn't new in this country, right? But it's just an interesting view 60 years ago to take a look at the pattern and tone of conversation they took with one another. But I think rather than, and I don't want to give up on it, but rather than trying to imagine, two opposing parties co-creating something which ought to be able to happen in a democracy, that does seem kind of hard to imagine right now. Mm-hmm. So I want to take it one level back, which is why I touched on the point about the televised discussion. But let's take away the TV cameras and let's just say, so famously in Washington, some of the worst fights aren't Democrats and Republicans going at each other. It's the State Department and the people from Treasury and the White House all doing their interagency backstabbing knife fights. It's awful. And you talk to people who are engaged in that. These are wonderful people behaving badly in meetings, thinking they're sticking up for whatever their tribe is. Their tribe is state or Treasury. But where does that stop? Right? Like, just go within one department, just within Treasury or just within state. Then it's whatever divisions within those things. And that same pattern of win-lose dominates at every level. And so if you ran that in reverse and just say, well, it doesn't seem unreasonable that the people at the State Department could sit around and try to co-create a plan together. And then one level higher, the state and Treasury couldn't have structured disagreement, right? This isn't a group hug, kumbaya thing. This is like working through hard things together.
Can you explain your? This kind of flows into, I believe, your I'll call it the also theory. I don't recall exactly the words that you would use, but the acronym also, that there is that third way, that there is also this viewpoint. Also stands for ask. What is it? It's ask, learn, or serve, and I have it here actually.
Ask. You're very good. You're very sweet. It's I changed it, so I misremember, but it's the long version. So it's ask, link, serve, open up.
That's right. Yes.
It used to be and it's all lowercase, right? So it spells the word also. And it was my little cheat sheet that I would just write on a little piece of paper when I was in a meeting on political campaigns, and then later as ambassador, as just this kind of, I guess like a cheat sheet. And so the longer version is like, ask people about their hopes and fears. And then, and like listen to what they say and link it to your own hopes and fears. And then serve that overlap of like, oh, you care about, I care about this also. And then open up, and in the act of serving it, as Brene Brown would say, be vulnerable. Don't try to have it all figured out in advance. And that's what I observed a lot of these great leaders doing. It's what, President Obama, who I admire greatly as a leader, is often credited. He's obviously a gifted public speaker, of course. That's not, I don't think there are a lot of gifted public speakers. I watched him work with small groups of people in Iowa when he was 28 points behind, when he came to Louisville, Kentucky, where I live. And that's what he was doing. I don't know if he'd put it that way, but he was asking people, linking it to why he was contemplating back then a run for president, being open and honest. And I just watched how powerful that was. And right at the end of a meeting, as I share in the book, someone who couldn't come to the meeting with then Senator Obama said, oh, wow, I've heard about him. Did he light up the room? And I said, I think I know what you mean. Yes, the room got lit up, but he didn't light it up in that way. We all know those leaders, political leaders of both parties, who are just like big, giant, glowing forces of nature, right? And so the room gets lit up by them, and all we do is like reflect their light, so to speak. What Senator Obama did in this meeting I had from Republicans, independents, and Democrats sitting around a table in Louisville was he got everyone to switch their light on. And that's a really cool thing to watch happen. And that's the kind of leadership I think that this book talks about, and how to do that. And also, and the reason I picked those words, this is when I went to serve for the first time as ambassador in Sweden. I wrote the word also in all caps, and I was like, look, so many people are trained to think that leadership is, this is also going to spell also, to argue, to lecture, to strategize and organize, and again, I learned this on the campaign. I'd say everyone wanted, we taught these, I co-taught these volunteer training things where people come to Chicago headquarters from all around the country to get trained up for a day. It was really fun. And we'd ask them at the beginning of the day, what do you want to get out of this session today? And everyone would say, basically, I want to return to Boston or Austin or San Diego or wherever, armed with talking points on why people in my town or city should support, Obama over Edwards or Clinton or whoever else. And then I said, okay, quick show of hands, how many people here like to lose an argument? And no one ever raises their hand. And it's like, so why are we in the argument winning business? It's just really bad math. Don't make arguments with people. Ask them what's on their mind and listen respectfully and try to connect. That's the other also. Like, it's hard work. And so I say link for L. It used to be listen, ask, listen, serve, and open up. But I think listen has gotten so sort of dulled by politicians of both parties going on listening tours. And you just get the sense there's not all that much real listening going on. Do you know what I mean? It's like they know what they want to do, right? Yeah. And they're just listening for people to say the things they want to hear.
For the cameras.
And then make whatever decision they did. And that's probably overly cynical, but anyway, so ask, link, serve, open up.
I'm struck, Matthew, by how much of leadership is perceived, or our vision of debate and discussion is, I'm going to, as you said, lecture you with a viewpoint and just assume that you're going to fall in behind of that if I just bludgeon you over the head with enough facts about why my view is right. And it's not lost on me that you begin your lowercase acronym of also with ask questions. Why, my goodness, as you just said, is that so difficult for us?
Well, I love that you're doing this podcast. Why is it so difficult? And I think the answer is this. And I kind of begin and end the book. I didn't realize this, but I begin and end the book really with the first 3 words of the book are pretending is exhausting, right? And I'm just like, look how much pretending we do, especially in the name of leadership, but it's not limited to that. Like pretending at work, pretending at home. It's exhausting. And then it's like, well, okay, there must be something we hate worse than the exhaustion from pretending. And I think it's that we fear uncertainty and we are willing to pretend as a way of trying to get rid of uncertainty. And the end of the book, I tell a story where I'm seated after giving a speech about the kinds of stuff we're talking about now, to a CEO whose company had just laid off 1,300 people and was hiring 1,300, basically laying off the same number of people that they were hiring. And I was curious. I had 3 teenagers at house, jobs that are going away, and what are the jobs you're hiring for? What are they? And the ones that are going away, the CEO basically said, hey, if you can predict with decent accuracy, and he started to like make the motion with his hand, like, if you can predict what a work week looks like with you every week for the next few weeks, watch out. If you can eliminate uncertainty in your job will be eliminated. I mean, that was he didn't say it quite so harshly, but that's kind of the gist of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of weird that you're encouraged to like get rid of uncertainty, but the more you do that, the more risky it is. And I said, well, okay, what are the jobs you're hiring for? He's like, well, that's harder, and he basically says, the jobs that we're hiring for are people who can ask questions they don't know they can ask questions of people they barely know and ask questions they don't know the answer to and follow them wherever they may lead. Right? Which is what you're doing on your podcast. And it's like, that is uncertainty with a capital U. Like, I'm asking a question I don't know the answer to of people I don't even know that well, and I'm following it some direction I don't know. And that is a constellation mindset, to be willing to take that leap. You are setting off in a direction, but you're not working back from a set goal like you are in a pyramid view of the world. And that takes a leap of faith to do it. But that's why I think people are so hesitant to ask real questions. I mean, they do fake questions, like ask questions you know the answer to. Like, well, that's not really a question. Or I was doing another webinar recently where someone's like, ooh, in my company, the culture is back channeling, that before anyone actually has a meeting, everything's been pre-decided. So like, hey, I'm going to suggest this. Can you quickly agree on Zoom? And then we can get it all stitched up. It's like, again, you understand the instinct, right? But that's no thinking and learning and changing is going on there.
You mentioned goals and working backwards from goals in a company. Let's use a company, to your point, as an example. In a company that is bought into the title of your book, The Power of Giving Away Power, implementing this constellation mindset. What role do goals have? Where are they set? Who drives them? Do we even call them goals anymore?
Yeah, it's so interesting because one of the big misunderstandings about the constellation mindset and constellation organizations is that it's just fancy words for chaos, right? Because people who have lived in the pyramid, which is most of us, either the pyramid out there or the pyramid sort of in here in each of us, is that it is comforting. It provides stability and order. It's just not the only kind of stability and order. There is stability and order in a constellation mindset. And these successful companies, Wikipedia, Visa, the biggest commercial organization in the history of the world, the internet itself, Alcoholics Anonymous, all these different examples I share in the book, there is a deep, early, rigorous pattern and tone set at the very beginning. This is not let 1,000 flowers bloom. This is not a group hug. This is not hands off, let's see where it goes. There's real rigor and order. It's just a different kind than the pyramid order. And so your question around goals is a really good one, because and I experienced this. I was asked by the mayor of our city of Louisville to help do, at the outset of COVID, to do some really short-term COVID relief fundraising and distribution. And at our first meeting, I was trying to put this into practice. I mean, I was still working on the book. It wasn't published yet, but it was pretty much done. And I was like, ooh, okay, this is a good test. And I was like, well, so I think the kind of goals that aren't helpful of like, well, let's set a goal of raising whatever, X amount of dollars, work backwards from there. And it's like, when you start to work backwards, you just inevitably end up in this pyramid, right? And most fundraisers draw pyramids on their whiteboard, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, I was just looking at a thing that it's like super rich person at the top, and then 3 pretty super rich. And then, and then at the bottom of the pyramid, you always have, and it's always lame, almost always lame, like friends of the fill in the blank, right? And you wonder, and it's like the actions and the behaviors to talk to that sort of mega rich person at the top looks nothing like the pattern and tone taken to engage, quote, friends of the library or friends of the whatever it is. And you wonder why those things have no energy and are lame. And by contrast, but so anyway, I'm not doing a very good job answering your question. But there is, it's not like you do need, let's just call them goals. I think there's nothing wrong with goals, obviously. But I'm trying to think of what a better word might be. But the key is not to work backwards from them. Because I think when you work backwards, literally, you should, it is a backwards way of working. Because then you start to just put on blinders and factor out uncertainty. You just start to pretend. That's where all the pretending starts. And if you instead sort of embrace all the uncertainty, like I have no idea how customers are going to respond to so-and-so, but let's be incredibly alive to the signals we're getting from whatever it might be in our system of our company. Because the other thing that the pyramid thinking tends to put blinders on, what I used to do when I was in the private sector, in the early days of internet, I start every meeting with a whiteboard with just 2 stick figures, our readers or listeners or users is that awful term we use in tech, and then advertisers, because we made our money with connecting those 2 people, right? We were a publishing business. And it was like, just start with them, because everything we're doing in between those 2 stick figures is what we're doing, but in service of one of those 2 people. So let's just never lose sight of that, and what are they telling us either directly or indirectly by their actions or their checkbooks or whatever it was. I just dated myself, checkbook. So yeah, like dashboards, whatever, like how we doing. But again, there's that slippery, and I know it's trendy now, but I just find it so like the KPI, that lingo, key performance indicator. It's just like, well, let's just not reinforce that we're cogs in a machine. And so this sort of mechanical view of people is so awful.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. So why, and life's hard enough without mechanizing the human mind. We just shouldn't stand for it. It's terrible. And you're just getting a fraction of the energy and ideas and potential creativity and power from anyone on your team of whatever size in whatever kind of organization, if you treat them like gears in a machine.
Matthew, I'm struck by hearing you say that. One of my favorite quotes in the book, and I even wrote it down because I wanted to read it to you, but it wasn't even in this context, but now it makes so much sense. You said, does the small pattern you just expressed or just observed look like the big thing you would want if you repeated it and repeated it? Are we shouting for calm, throwing rocks for peace, fighting for healing? I read that, I highlighted it, and then I wanted to throw the book across the room in a good way. Like I just was like, this is it. Like that is it. And in hearing you in the context of the answer that you just gave to that question, am I safe in saying that in treating the employees like cogs and looking and digging into the minutia of the KPIs and the little details on the dashboard, if we expanded that, like, would that be the environment we would want to play in at a whole?
Ooh, I like that.
Is that a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, like it would be, and if you did that, I think that would be so yucky to the leaders of that organization who have implemented all the KPI. And I used to do this, but I don't want to be like, I mean, at CNET, I was, the fourth employee. And so I remember we would do these, the terms were so weird we used. This is like late 90s at this point. We would like cascade goals down to people.
Yes.
We'd set 3 of them like at the top. And then but imagine being on the receiving end of having goals cascaded onto you. I mean, it's just, we might as well, it's just so weird.
Yeah.
And by the way, and if you take that to its logical thing, it doesn't look like the machine, like, because the leadership group of that company that does that, like, no one wants to think of themselves like that. So if it all kind of, I mean, just you've got me thinking. This is good.
And expanding that quote out, are we shouting for calm, throwing rocks for peace, fighting for healing? I mean, you expand that out to any societal issue that we're facing these days, and I don't think any of us want that, right? I mean,
well, I know, and one of the things I do, and I do it towards the end of the book, and we went back and forth about whether it should be in there. If it should be in there, where should it be? And so I'm going to tell you the story because I am picking a fight with Teddy Roosevelt. And particularly this very famous quote that he has, which is not the critic who counts, it's the man in the arena whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, right? Now, the reason we thought of maybe not putting it in was like, I'll tell you some people who love it. Obama read it or quoted from it at John McCain's eulogy in one of the most beautiful and rare bipartisan moments of healing in the last few years, right? Brene Brown, whose work I love, all of her books are inspired by that quote. LeBron James has it etched into his basketball shoes, right? So like Nelson Mandela loved it. So these are like some of the great leaders and thinkers and doers that I admire. And I think it is an unhelpful bit of leadership advice. And the reason I think it is not healthy is that it gives us 2 choices. You either are being a bystander or sitting on the sidelines, or you are fighting it out in the arena. And it is not very subtly, if you read the whole thing, it's gladiatorial. Mm-hmm. Like that's you're there's like blood and dust. You're like fighting it out by yourself, win or lose, die trying. And it's poetic and it would make for a good movie, But those are the 2 choices, fight it out or sit it out. And I'm sort of like, well, there is a third option. Like we talk, like, what if we built arenas together? What if we worked on things and made things together? What happens after the gladiatorial fight? Like, where do you go? Like so much of what we actually value in life isn't fighting it out or sitting it out. Oh, and by the way, we're in Americans listening, and many of your listeners hopefully are living in a democracy.
Yeah.
Of course, the critic counts. Our whole system is based on, they can be annoying, but we are often the critic, and we should count. And if we started to have more pattern where we invite in a constructive way critics into the discussion, like I suggested earlier on the new discussion format, replacing a debate, not replacing a debate, but like in that one instance, like there's room for debate, there's room for winning and losing, there's room for fighting it out in the arena. It's just not the only thing.
You got me stumped. I mean, that's just so good. Matthew, I want to be respectful of your time. So what is a question that you wish you were asked more?
Oh, well, a question that I have been asked that I like, that I really am thinking about and wrestling with and would welcome suggestions on. Because a number of the examples in the book of constellation leadership are Alcoholics Anonymous, the internet, Wikipedia. I'll pick three that are like game changing, but aren't profit motive isn't the point, right? And the one big example of one of the most profitable companies and the largest commercial organization in the world, which is the thing we now know as Visa, which is hard to get, with high APRs and Visa, but if you go to the founding and the amazing guy D Hawk and the small team of people who sat around a table and co-created this whole system and radically rethought it around giving away power and letting tiny little banks no one's heard of be on equal footing with the biggest bank in the country. And this whole it's an amazing story and created the biggest commercial organization the world has ever seen. I think there's a skepticism on the part of some business leaders of it's okay for nonprofits. It's okay for Wikipedia. It's not relevant in a for-profit thing. I think that's not right. I think it's absolutely relevant. I think there's elements, and I don't put this in the book, I took it out, but I think if you look at the founding story of Airbnb and you look at the pattern and tone set by the founders, it's pretty a beautiful and interesting story and how they've come through COVID. And so I think and I'm hungry for lessons from listeners who read the book and have seen it in their for-profit ventures where they've seen it at work because, and I hope to write another book and I want to share more of those stories too, just to show that this is not limited to the world of nonprofits or, which I think Visa ought to demonstrate, but clearly we need and ought to show and showcase more.
So the question is, where else is this working?
Yeah, but there you go. Where else is this working? And not limited just to for-profit, but I'm particularly interested and curious about those places.
Very good. Very good. Well, I hope you get examples of that for sure. Matthew, this has been fantastic. You have given me so much to think about and ruminate on. And like I said, I loved the book. How can people get a hold of it? I'm assuming just anywhere you buy books, but how can people connect with your work?
Anywhere you buy books, the big online e-tailers, the ones that collect all the independent bookstores, they've got it there. And then if you want to learn more about it, MatthewBarzun.com. So MatthewBarz like zebra, UN like November. MatthewBarzun.com has links to all the different places you can get it. And also a place if you have suggestions, if you have read it or do read it, and have suggestions of where you've seen this at work in your life or your organizations, that's a place to share that because I'm hungry for feedback.
Wonderful.
And thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Best of wishes to you in the book. All right.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Are we shouting for calm, throwing rocks for peace, fighting for healing? Think about those words as you go about the rest of your week. Here this week, having heard the conversation with Matthew Barzun about his book, The Power of Giving Away Power, and the constellation mindset and co-creating new solutions to big issues. So many thanks to Matthew for sharing his story and wisdom and experience on the show this week. Please do me and Matthew a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might find some value in listening to our conversation today. Share the episode with your network and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the incredible conversations with the many guests that I have on this show, like Matthew Barzun, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Subscribing also helps the show gain more reach, and that is a good thing. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com or go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I will catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.